Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Hillary Noon, and you are here for Powering Nonprofit Purpose in the Cloud. I am joined by three nonprofit leaders who will do their introductions in a few minutes. I'm going to kick us off today with a little bit of background about some research that we've conducted recently, and then we're going to have a discussion about three different nonprofit examples of how their journeys in the cloud. Once again, my name is Hillary Noon. I lead our global strategy for the AWS nonprofit business. I have over 25 years experience in the nonprofit sector, having worked with social impact and nonprofit organizations for most of my career. And my role at AWS involves working with many different nonprofit organizations and partners to learn about their obstacles as well as their opportunities that they're looking to use and harness technology for. We would love to have you all walk away from today with three key takeaways. The first being to learn about organizations at different stages of cloud maturity, to gain a better sense of where you are, your organization is in your cloud journey, and to be empowered with actions that you can take to advocate for cloud technology within your organizations. We often hear from customers that this is part of the challenge, not only understanding where they are, but also how to proceed and how to address some of the challenges that you might have advocating internally for this kind of a digital transformation. So just a little bit about AWS for nonprofits before we kick off. We sit within the public sector division of AWS, which includes all of our work with federal government, state and local governments, education, nonprofit, and healthcare organizations. Specifically within the nonprofit team, we support over 80,000 different nonprofit organizations around the world, and this includes all nonprofit mission types, sizes of organizations, and different challenges that they're trying to address. So what's wonderful about this is we get exposed to lots of different ways in which organizations are trying to really impact the world. But we also are able to tap into our commercial friends, not only across our internal teams, but also at events like this, where we can learn from the aspirational work that some large entities, commercial entities are doing, and then also see how we can apply those within the nonprofit sector. So I'd love to get a sense of where everyone in the room is in terms of your organization's cloud maturity. Hopefully we have our live polling working. If you all would get your phones out and give this a try. Get that QR code, plug in the code, and then the question should pop up. How would you rate your organization's maturity level in the cloud? We'll give you just a few seconds to answer that. All right. Let's go ahead and bring up the results. Okay, cool. Wow, we've got some. Oh, and the bars are actively moving. We have about half of you, your organizations are advanced, and about 40% are intermediate, and then a few beginners as well, which is great. I think we'll have a little something for all of you in our conversation today. Let's go ahead and go back to our presentation. And one other question for you all. So that was as an organization. I'd love for you to answer a similar question applied to you as an individual. We often find that the organization may be either super advanced and you might be a business leader and may not quite be fully versed in the cloud, or you might be a technical person and your organization is still not kind of taking on that transformation journey that you'd like to see. Give you just a couple seconds there. All right, let's see where we are. Okay. So again, we've got about half of you saying you're advanced and about 40% intermediate. Okay, so it seems like there's some alignment between the individuals and your organizations, which is interesting. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's go back to the presentation. All right, so with that as a basis, we actually wanted to understand the answers to those questions more broadly. Within the technology sector, there aren't really very many reports, industry analyst reports on the nonprofit views of technology. So we decided to commission some research, some third-party research, using feedback from about 700 or so nonprofit organizations across the US to understand their mindsets towards technology, how they think about it, what are some of their biggest challenges, as well as how they make decisions about investments and the kinds of problems that they're trying to solve for. We got a lot of really rich insight from this data, from this research, and we used it to not only help ourselves to advocate for changes in how we help our nonprofit organization customers, but also to formulate 3 mindsets. And I just want to briefly orient you to these mindsets. So this is, again, data-driven view of the nonprofit sector in the US. About half, 46%, just under half, are sitting in this category called embracing and embarking. This tends to be smaller organizations, although we do have mid and large organizations in this category as well. These are organizations where the enterprise, so like senior leadership and the enterprise strategy of the organization, does not yet kind of embrace technology and kind of digital transformation at its core. They see it more as an operational cost and potentially an important underpinning, but separate from the core strategy. But this group is really in a discovery mode. They're trying to understand, trying to educate themselves on where to start and what they should be focused on. That next mindset is something we call launching and learning. This group tends to be more project-oriented. This makes up half of the market, and really we see a variety of small, medium, and large organizations in this mindset. So it's far-reaching and very diverse as a group. This is where most of our customers sit, and we see that this is the type of organization where you might have 1 or 2 leaders who have an innovative mindset and are willing to try something. And they might have a little extra budget, so they want to try a POC, or they've heard about an innovative use of technology for their mission problems, and so they are willing to try something, even separate from what might be part of the enterprise strategy. And then finally, we have our innovating and accelerating mindset. This is our more advanced group. They do tend to be larger customers, larger organizations, but we have some very small ones in here as well. It really comes down to how they view the role of technology in their mission. These organizations, you usually can't separate their view of technology from what it takes to advance their mission. And these are typically organizations that do have dedicated IT staff and talent who are trained in the cloud. So if you're interested in finding out where your organization sits, you can download or click into this assessment. This is built off the research that we did. It is a data-driven assessment. It takes just a few minutes. And I would encourage you to do that for yourselves, and then also bring some of your leaders together and take it and discuss the findings and whether or not that is something that you want to actually address internally in terms of how you advance your own journey. So thank you for listening to the beginnings of our talk. I'm now excited to turn it over to Julian Thompson from the United Negro College Fund, who's going to talk a little bit about their journey on AWS.
Thank you so much, Hillary, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege to be with you all. My name is Julian Thompson, and I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Director of Strategy for a unit within the United Negro College Fund called the Institute for Capacity Building. If those of you in the crowd aren't familiar with United Negro College Fund, we're a 79-year-old organization, and our primary mission is to provide services, supports, and resources to our country's 102 historically Black colleges and universities. For those of you who aren't familiar with HBCUs, HBCUs in the audience. They are a group of institutions that have been in our country since 1837. They are focused on the service of formerly enslaved African American communities, and they've been doing that in a way that really has transcended boundaries and opportunity spaces since their founding in 1837. So it's a real privilege to be a part of the United Negro College Fund, where I get to work on the question, how might we use new professional development, new systems, new communities of practice, and in this case, new technologies to be able to help those institutions advance their missions. In 2019, we started to engage our HBCU partners on the question of their footprint on the online learning space. And when we did that, we realized a shocking statistic that in 2019, 55% of higher education institutions had online degree granting programs compared to just 25% of HBCUs at that time. When we asked our HBCUs why they hadn't adopted online technology, why they hadn't chosen to embrace a space that was clearly sort of trending in the rest of higher education, they basically said two things. They said, number one, it's too expensive. There's barriers to entry when it comes to the adoption of technology. We don't have the time, we don't have the capacity. Sometimes we don't have the subject matter expertise that we need to be able to embrace that type of technology in a way that we think we could compete with our other higher education competitors. And the second reason they said when we asked them why they didn't embrace the online learning space was that when they looked at the technologies that were available in online learning, what they didn't see was technology that reflected their own culture, their own mission, their own pedagogy, their own approach to student education and student learning. And so because they didn't see the application of technologies that would support their institutional type, they basically avoided the question of adoption of online learning. At the Institute for Capacity Building at UNCF, when we kind of came back and sort of unpacked those questions, we realized that there was an opportunity to have HBCUs partner with each other on the question of online technology adoption. And so we developed a proposal called HBCUV, or HBCU Virtual, which is our attempt to get HBCUs around the country to galvanize around a single system for the provision of online learning education and learning and social experiences that can support them, their students, and their communities. We drafted that proposal in January 2020. And when we sent it to our leadership at UNCF, they basically said, "You gotta be kidding me. This is the United Negro College Fund, a nonprofit that's focused on fundraising and other activities that are related to resource supports. There's no way we're gonna be able to take on a technology feat like the development of something called HBCUV." And so they told us to take a 6-month walk to try to figure out how we might create the conditions for HBCUV to be successful. And then 6 weeks after that, the pandemic happened. And then 2 months after that, George Floyd was murdered. And we found ourselves in a position in 2020 where we could dream with our institutions, what might we be able to achieve that would help HBCUs leapfrog the competition and really become leaders in the online learning space. When we started to imagine the solution of reimagining Black higher education, what we came to was sort of 3 key principles. Number one, that we wanted to focus on revolutionary ed tech, that we wanted to develop a technology that would be responsive to institutional and student needs from our community in a way that wasn't replicated by the current technology used in higher education. We wanted to do that through radical collaboration, meaning we built an asset that was to be developed and managed by a group of HBCUs in partnership with each other. And then the third principle that we identified was rightful ownership, that as we created this technology, we wanted it to be an asset to the HBCUs that we partnered with. We conducted a significant amount of research, 3,300 hours of research, including surveys and ethnographic studies and in-depth interviews, to basically try to unpack and understand what is it about the HBCU space or the HBCU context that we want to try to replicate in the online learning space. And then critically, we brought our institutional partners along for the ride. So we identified subject matter experts at 9 HBCUs who have been partnering with us since the winter of 2020 on the development of the platform. We have been on an incredible journey, and as I said, because we're a nonprofit organization that focuses on fundraising and resource acquisition, it was hard for us to understand how we might navigate to get the type of technology, including the type of cloud technology, that would help us be successful. And as we've developed our journey and our process, we've been able to really identify a group of partners that are going to help us advance a technology that we think is going to be transformational for the higher education landscape. We are partnered with Deloitte Digital, who has provided our project management and subject matter expertise to be able to guide and facilitate the process. As you can see here, Canvas is our learning management system. We're using Okta and OneTrust for privacy. We're using Pathify to provide student engagement tools. We're using Tableau for data reporting. And when it came to the question of who we would use for our cloud technology, after a long and evolved process, we were pleased to identify AWS as the most ideal institution or the most ideal partnership that would really work to help our institutions achieve their mission. And so I'm really pleased to be a part of this panel and to share more over the course of our conversation about why AWS's solutions ended up being palatable not only for us as a nonprofit, but for the institutions we serve. To share a little bit more from an organization that's a little bit further along in their cloud journey, I'm pleased to introduce Kevin Farron, the Director of Data Integration and Management from the Greenwood Genetics Center.
Thank you, Julian. I appreciate it. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to share today. As Julian mentioned, I'm with the Greenwood Genetics Center, and we are focused on providing clinical, diagnostic, and research in the area of genetics for the state of South Carolina for those afflicted with rare genetic disorders. And I think I'm certain I'm not alone in this room dealing with the problems that we faced with very high volume, high complexity, and multimodal data. Right? This is just the definition of 2023 is everyone has more data than they know what to do with. It's stored in various formats, and how do we make that data actionable? So this was the problem that I was faced with when I joined GGC in 2018. We had basically, as it says here, we had exhausted the value we could extract from that data using our existing method. So the question was, how could we look at it differently? How could we find different solutions? And we needed something that would scale. As you know, genetic data is significant in volume and complexity, so we need something that could grow as we continue to collect samples and process data. We need something that aligns us with the industry best practices, gives us security when we're dealing with protected health information. And ultimately, and I think, again, everyone can align to this, is how do we simply shorten the time from someone asking a question to getting the answer, right? Innovation moves at the speed of data access, and if you've got people downloading data to a spreadsheet and then it doesn't work, right? We need to make this data, put it at the fingertips of our providers and our researchers so they can get answers to their questions more quickly. So in our particular case, looking at AWS, what we found was a library of services that really meet all the needs that we have and all the problems that we face. This is our particular solution, but really the idea here is, we have not found a single instance where we have a problem or need a service within the AWS platform that there's not a solution for. So we happen to be merging all our data into Amazon HealthLake. So for healthcare facilities, it provides a common data model for our data to get organized and structured, but really that's just step one. Really the ultimate goal is to make that data more actionable and tying it into SageMaker and HealthOmics. So if you've listened to the keynote this morning, you heard a lot about generative AI. So, facilitating those kind of capabilities and giving us access to those capabilities is key. In the keynote this morning, we also heard, that we need to build with the end in mind. So similarly, we're taking that approach and thinking about what are the outcomes that we want to facilitate and the outcomes that we want to realize through this development. And so in our particular case, ultimately what we're looking for is to get more patients a diagnosis. Those that are dealing with rare genetic disorders typically wait about 7 years to get a genetic diagnosis, and only about 50% get a diagnosis. So we ultimately want every patient that we care for to get a diagnosis. And so by making this data more actionable, right, we can find patients that are afflicted with a specific disorder and find commonly affected patients. We can start to apply advanced analytics techniques to identify new patterns of disease, ultimately increase our diagnostic rate above where we are today. And then through healthomics and other data analytics platforms that are available within AWS, we can continue to process more data, more complex data, and ultimately, again, move our mission forward. And so at this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to Borhan. So Borhan is the CEO of Rainforest Connection, and he's going to share with us his experience in the cloud.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing? My name is Borhan Yassin. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit organization called Rainforest Connection. A little bit about me. I spent most of my career in the for-profit world. My last company before Rainforest Connection was an e-commerce company that turned out to be quite successful in the Middle East, MENA region. And I come from a technical background, and most of the work that I've done throughout my career, and certainly in what you're about to see in Rainforest Connection, happened on the cloud. So I would say most of my companies that I've been involved in were born in the cloud and dependent on the cloud quite heavily. So I figured as the last presenter, make it a little bit more exciting. I'm going to ask you to listen into something. It's one good way to show you about what we do is perhaps a bit of show and tell. So we're about to play a short 30-second clip of a recording in Panama, captured from Panama in one of our projects. And I'd like you to try to identify how many species you think you can hear in that short 30-second clip. Okay, now let me show you what you just heard. So this is a 3D representation of the sound that you just heard. And using AI, using artificial intelligence, we can actually detect over 15 species that have occurred in this just 30-second clip of audio. You can see spider monkeys there. You can see cicadas, different types of birds. All these things were just in a 30-second clip of audio. In fact, this whole time, there's a chainsaw that was going on in the background. And we can only hear it. You can only hear it if we dim down all the sounds. The human ear is unable to decipher all these different species, unable to decipher the fact that there was a chainsaw, somebody cutting down trees this whole time. And it was only if we actually dimmed this artificially that you were able to hear it. And that's the power of AI. That's the power of using big data and cloud and being able to identify things that normal humans cannot do. And that's what we do at Rainforest Connection. Why is this so important? Well, over 14 million acres of rainforests are destroyed every single year. And it's threatening over 1 million species with extinction. All these species that you see here, and as you know, birds and amphibians and all types of taxonomies, they're vocal, right? One very good and very profound way to try to understand what is going on in forests around the world is to actually listen to them. So sound is one of those important technologies and techniques that we can use to actually identify species. And what we use it for is to identify the presence of species and consequently the absence of species. And why that's important is that it allows us to understand the state of the forest. We can also use that same technology to identify threats. We use it to, you see these devices that you see up there called the Guardians. They're basically a mini computer with a bunch of solar panels that sits on top of the tree canopy. They record the soundscape 24/7, and they send all that information to the cloud where it gets analyzed. Every single recording gets analyzed. We're able to identify species down to the individual song itself, not just to the species type. We can identify if it's a mating call or an alarming call, etc. We can tell when there's gunshots, which are indicative of poaching. We can tell when there's chainsaws, which are indicative of people cutting down trees, or trucks, which are indicative of people transporting, or at least shouldn't belong there. And we can do all of that with the power of technology, right? I've been to the ground many times, and when you go down there and you're there with the local communities, the local indigenous people, and you see the amount of resources they have compared to the amount of land that they can protect, it's astronomical difference, right? You'll have, one example is the Tembe indigenous tribe, which we work with in the state of Pará in Alto Rio Guama in Brazil. They're a total of 2,900 Tembe people that are there at a land the size of Yosemite National Park. And out of those 2,900, there's only about 30 what they call warriors, which are people that are designated to go out and do patrols. So imagine 30 people trying to do a patrol for the entire Yosemite National Park size of an area, right? With all of the complications that happen on the ground. So using technology like this, a single device, a single Guardian, can monitor 7 square kilometers. It can listen almost 1.5 kilometers in every direction for mechanical sounds, which trucks and gunshots and chainsaws are that. So it's very important to have technology, right? And it's very important to be able to use that technology in a way where we can continue advancing it and advancing and advancing it. And that's what we're doing with the cloud, right? This is our team, caption of the team that we have. It's actually me on the top right. I stumbled, this was in Peru a few years ago. Actually, we installed the Guardian device, and the next day it started throwing alarms. So we went out there and we actually found loggers right there, cutting down trees. And the patrolmen at the time, they kicked them out and did all that stuff. But yeah, this is me stumbling on those. But we're also a team on the ground. We're working directly with these people on the ground to try to see how best to use technology, use sound, use acoustics to be able to help them do their job better. What has this done so far? Well, we've actually created a platform. That platform is called Arbimon. It's an open, free, available for anyone, unlimited amount of data that you can upload platform that allow you to use sound to do exactly what we're doing. All these learnings that we get from the field, all these opportunities that we get to work with partners, we actually translate that into automated workflows that we put online. So Arbimon is one of those tools that now is being used with over 4,000 projects around the world. There's over 1.3 billion analysis that have been done on Arbimon to date, over 145 million 1-minute recordings. If you put that in terms of size, we have almost a petabyte of data on S3 right now stored, and it's all continuous. It's probably the largest continuous collection of soundscapes in the world, perhaps even in history of forest soundscapes. And people are using it from over 119 different countries. And like I said earlier, and I mentioned about myself, but also as an organization, we're quite advanced in the cloud. We were born in the cloud. And architecture tells that, right? We're using lots of AWS services, a lot of different things to ensure that we can continue offering this level of integration to our partners, and in some of these things, it's actually very important to alert people on the ground immediately and so on. And with that, I thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to Laura.
All right. Awesome. Well, I don't know about you all, but I really I've heard these stories multiple times, but it's so impressive to hear the different ways in which each of you are using the cloud. And what I find really interesting too is kind of the marriage of some traditional and in some cases very human processes with the use of technology and the ability to kind of amplify those human processes with technology. And with that, you each talked about some of the positive outcomes that you've seen, but you've also encountered some challenges along the way. And what I would love to do is bring the audience back into this particular part of the dialogue before we have a panel discussion about the barriers and challenges that each of you are facing as well. With any technology implementation, you may be addressing some challenges within your organization, or it could be with the beneficiaries of your mission or your partners. If you all would just take a few seconds, take out your phones and answer this particular poll. Would love to get your take on the biggest challenges or barriers that your organization faces when prioritizing technology initiatives. All right, let's go ahead and see. All right, so budgetary seems to be about a third, followed by lack of IT or technical resources or capabilities. That's pretty typical of what we see broadly. And then organizational leadership buy-in, yep. And then overwhelmed by the choices. Okay, really helpful, thank you all. Let's go ahead and with that in mind, I'd love to turn back to our panel, and we'd love each of you to talk a little bit about the biggest challenges or barriers that you all faced when prioritizing either your current investments or even as you kind of think about your overall work in the cloud. And Borhan, let's start with you,
Sure.
and just especially because yours is a little unique, you're a little farther along in your journey.
Right.
You can talk about how you think about that particular question.
Yeah, definitely. Looking at the poll, certainly when you think of nonprofits, I think constrained budgets are, one of our biggest issues, right? So we do operate under that pretense quite a bit, and budgetary constraints is a big issue for us, and we make sure that we keep our cost as low as possible. And in fact, AWS actually offers great tools to allow you to do that, which is really helpful, right? Being able to talk to the right people to reduce these costs. I think for us, the biggest challenges have been less about the organization's buy-in, because as I mentioned in my presentation, we're essentially born in the cloud. It was more about how we can get our partners and our clients to adopt using cloud. Now, if you think of what I mentioned about the Arbimon platform that we make available, these are all scientists, these are all biologists and ecologists. These are all people that are used to lock away their data on hard drives. They operate in the middle of some of the most remote areas, so cloud access is very difficult for them. So trying to get these people to go to a cloud approach and start using a cloud platform has been very challenging. So I think for us, I'm sure you'll hear a little bit differently with the rest of the folks, but for us, the biggest challenge has been primarily to get our partners and our customers on the cloud and making sure they're making the best usage of it. And the way that comes in many ways, convincing them that it's the right way to go. There's many ways to do that, whether it's showcasing the power of cloud and how we can make use of it or how it can save them time and so on. For us, at least, that's been our biggest challenge.
So I think that's really important because we often look internally in terms of how am I going to, get my leadership enrolled, and it certainly came up from all of you as well. But knowing that there's also the beneficiary goals or your partner goals that you have to keep in mind. Julian, would love for you to comment a little bit on kind of your experience. Both, I know you talked a little bit about the internal process you went through, but also taking into account your students and kind of how they view this type of.
Yeah, I think for us and for the institutions we work with, The organizational leadership buy-in question was a particular challenge that was important for us to really embrace and then overcome. HBCU leaders are oftentimes wearing a lot of hats, and they have to make a dollar of activity happen on a dime's worth of investment as a natural part of how they operate. And they figure out ways to do that very well in terms of their traditional mission, but sometimes it can make the process of change management particularly difficult, right? So when you're thinking about the adoption of a new technology, the process that it takes to understand how that technology is going to be adopted, understand the ownership rights around new information that can be collected, the privacy related to it, what the opportunity space is, if you think about the use of that data or the use of that information long term, really does require, I think, an educational journey. So for us, it was really important that we sort of start with a level of humility about sort of wanting to bring our entire community along for the journey. Because UNCF was not just implementing this project for its own sake, but on behalf of a group of a network of institutions, that process of unpacking challenges, uncovering the dynamics of what each institution thought about their strategic mission and vision was particularly important. And I think, for our institutions, as we sort of participated in that educational process, it became clear, number one, that each of them in their own way, maybe in pockets of their institution that they didn't have strong familiarity with, were already embarking on some part of the cloud journey, whether it be intentional or organic. And so really bringing those pieces to bear was a critical piece. And then when you started to engage students and other sort of users of higher education products, they're already have all their information on the cloud, aren't using non-cloud-based services as a natural part of how they operate. And so the educational journey about not only the technology, but about how students were using it ended up being particularly important for us to get the buy-in we needed to overcome the initial hurdles.
You emphasized education many, many times. And I think we certainly see that with our customers, and I'm sure many of you do as well. Really, and by investing in that journey with your internal leaders, I'm sure you learned a lot too along the way about some of the things that you needed to account for.
Yeah, if you're gonna take on something that is asking people to dream big, you have to have the patience to have people wrap their whole arms and whole spirits around that dream. And so that's the right and proper process to get someone to achieve something that's beyond their vision or beyond their aspiration. And because we did it in that way, we now are in a process where just about every institution that started with us in the research phase is now ready to implement HBCUV next year. And so that creates the conditions that we were hoping for in the initial outset, is that we could get a group of institutions not comfortable with technology adoption to embrace something that was truly world-class.
Awesome story. Yeah, it takes time up front, but then you can accelerate towards the end.
Yep.
Kevin, what about you? What kind of barriers did you encounter in your journey?
I think the initial and primary barrier that we ran into was what I would call organizational inertia. It's just sort of this is the way we've done it. We will continue to do it that way, and just getting everyone to see a different way of solving these problems. And then additionally, working in the healthcare space, data security and data privacy is paramount. And there's a sense of security, whether it's real or perceived, in having that data close, right? Having it on premise, there's a feeling of security, and there was some trepidation in moving into the cloud. And so the way I overcame that was primarily with small wins, right? It's if I can get them to trust me in something small, right, then you can gain trust when you come, as Julia mentioned, right, with the big idea. And so a good example was QuickSight, right? Just a very simple way of adding BI to our portfolio of products that we didn't have. And just showing here's a way we can visualize and make that data more accessible and more available very easily, right? Low cost, low complexity, low barrier to entry. And so small wins like that in our environment really then created trust for the bigger ideas that we're working towards.
So important, I think, a couple of things you said there. First of all, the willingness to try something and start small. The fact that you already knew that this was the right direction, so you came in with your own base of knowledge, which I think is important.
Right.
And then the QuickSight example, I think, is really good because visualization is something everybody can see and feel,
right.
and it's a great way to kind of enroll people who may not be technology friendly or comfortable.
Yeah, so when we provided our packet to our board in the last board meeting, it was a mix of analytics from QuickSight and then the old traditional text-based. And the directive I got out of that meeting was they want everything coming from here. So it's an example where when you can provide those tools and sort of show the capability, they can see the differentiation and quickly gravitate towards it.
Great example. All right, let's transition to talk a little bit about how nonprofit organizations get these kinds of investments. That might be where you are, or perhaps you have already done that within your organization and you're looking for the next big project. So I would love to, again, let's get a poll of what objectives you would like to achieve through investments in technology. And then we'll talk to the panel a little bit about their experience in either seeking funding, advocating for that within their organization, or any lessons learned that they have that they can share their own experiences. So I'll give you all just a few seconds to answer this one. All right, let's see what our results look like. Okay, looks like about a third of you are saying, improving operational efficiencies. Yes. And then I think we have a tie on most of the others. Improving delivery of mission programs, definitely. We heard some examples if you were in the keynote this morning too about that operational efficiencies one. All right, awesome. So let's go back to the slides and turn to the panel to unpack this one a little bit. I think many of us have to, with our nonprofit organizations, we have to seek funding from whether it's foundations or government agencies or even individual donors, or you're just trying to make the case to your finance team. And so how do you go about doing that, and what are some of the kind of experiences that you all have had? Would love to start, Julian, with you, especially given the fact that this is a fairly recent effort for you in advocating for this change.
Yeah, well, I got to say, if I had to take on a project of implementing a higher education technology with HBCUs and any organization in the country, I would probably choose the United Negro College Fund, because for the last 79 years, we've been collecting a lot of relationships from regional and national funders who are sort of zeroed in on the question of how do you help an HBCU sort of activate against its mission. Because of that, I think, the United Negro College Fund in general, HBCUs, more broadly, invest in the type of research and communications activities that really help people understand and translate value proposition in a way that's particularly compelling. So that's really important for us. If your organization doesn't have a cool sweatshirt that everyone's like, what's that all about? Then you should get one, because people need to know that your work is important, that you believe in the nature of what your work can do to change the human condition or change the nature of justice in our world. And so that's a particularly important piece for us. And then the research piece is important as well, because as we start to unpack the question of HBCUs applying their mission to the current context, I don't think any funder in 2023 is under any illusions that technology will have to be a part of solution sets to help nonprofits achieve their missions. I mean, it's just really inspiring from Kevin and from Borjan to hear about sort of whether it's deforestation of the rainforest or applying technologies to the health field and the genetics field, that there's a lot of challenges out there that we know technology will be a part of the solution because of AI, because of the proliferation of data, the aggregation of that data and its usability to be able to solve challenges. And so you've got to do the type of research, I think, to be able to map your mission and your aspirations to the technology applications. And once you do that, you're in, I think, a strong foundation to create value propositions. So that's been our strategy, and it's helped us so far get some of the resources we need to get the technology off the ground. And then from that point, we got to make sure that we prove that the technology application is successful.
Yeah. Great point. I love that, mapping the mission outcome to the technology. Really important to help tell that story. And Kevin, how did you do it with Greenwood?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer, so I did it with good old-fashioned math. So we had very simple. We had 100 terabyte on-premise server for file storage. It was hitting capacity, and so I went and looked and said, okay, well, should we replace it? Or should we transition data storage to the cloud? And so I did it just a basic 10-year cost projection. Very simple. And math won, right? Because when you add in not only the capital investment to procure additional storage servers, but then also the IT resources to support those, it just came out ahead. And so that was, the basic, the way I started this process. And then we were exceptionally fortunate at GDC to have a philanthropic donation dedicated towards data management. So God bless that person. And then most recently, so we participated in the Imagine Grant program and were awarded through the Imagine Grant, most recent in 2023, some funds to continue to build out our data warehouse. Lots of things coming together, but in our instance, it really came down to comparing the true cost of on-premise management of services to AWS, and it just came out ahead.
And for those of you who aren't familiar, we do have a calculator that can help you do that, as well as, of course, account management resources to help guide you through that. So what I love about that is it's the numbers, and that's really good for speaking, especially to a finance team. Mm-hmm. And Julian, what you described was a little bit more of the narrative and the storytelling that goes along with that, and the two things together, I think, are really important. And Borhan, I'd love to hear, I know your perspective is a little different, but would love any guidance you have for folks, given you guys are already in the cloud. There was no convincing there.
Sure.
But when it comes to investment, how do you think about that, and what advice do you have for other organizations going through that?
Yeah, I think for us, especially as a nonprofit startup, it's especially difficult because we don't have the relationships of big foundations or large donors that would donate every single year. We don't have certainly the long-standing reputation of 70, 80 plus years that's behind us. So it is difficult for us. We tried all kinds of things. We tried asking people to pay for the AWS bill, and that wasn't very successful because it's not a lot of fun. But I think what we discovered is it's not about the cloud costs. It's about what you're creating in the cloud and how important that is to your mission, how important that is to service your partners, your customers, et cetera. And if you showcase, and I think it's along the lines of what Julian was saying, if you showcase the true impact and story behind what you're building, I think that's how you attract funders and you attract support for it. And what worked for us as well, funders are a funny thing, which is it's hard to get funding for the same thing over and over again, at least in our experience. To come back and say, I have the solution A this year, and then next year I have that same solution A, I need more support for it. I have the same solution A, I need more support for it. Doesn't work very well with funders, at least from our experience. I can't speak for all funders. I'm talking from my own experience. I'm trying not to be a generalist here. But the point with that is that I think you need to also look at the path and the future of your solution in a way that you almost keep reinventing it. I'm not saying change your strategy, redesign your entire product or whatever it is, but make it exciting every single year, right? So those captivating stories, those things that actually showcase what your solution is doing could be exciting to a funder that's coming in, doesn't want to really get into the details of your architecture or whatever is going on, but they really want to support the end result. And if the end result is clear, it's exciting, it's important, it makes a difference, I think that's how you get them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Borhan, you've also talked in the past about how optimization of the use of AWS resources could also be part of a story, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're without divulging too much information, we're going through a great partnership that we're trying to establish right now, where that partner has somewhere around 7 or 8x. They're on a, let's not name it a competitor cloud, but the point is they're 7 or 8x the cost of what we use, of what we spend. And in terms of the resources used, it's almost at par of what we're doing. And the reason why, one, this is important for reducing your costs and being more operationally better, et cetera. But as it was mentioned, it's important to be part of that story to showcase that you're actually making the best uses of the cloud. You're optimizing the cloud, and it's not becoming just a massive cost center that's actually sucking in all of your resources. It's an important cost that's actually providing, X amount more in benefit, and I think that's a very important thing as part of the storytelling as well.
Yeah, and I think that if told the right way, it actually ends up feeding back into your mission and feeding back into allowing your staff members to focus on more innovation around your mission, which is really why you exist, right? So.
Yeah, I think one last point I would mention there. When we went out on this journey to say, hey, you can upload unlimited amounts of data, right? Unlimited amount of audio. People were like, you're crazy, because you're financing cloud resources. You're asking people to just upload data in an unlimited way. Doesn't make sense. And we made it make sense because we optimize it in such a way where the scalability of how much data is uploaded is not proportionate to the costs. And it made sense. And we made that available, and now we have that large Soundscape database that we talked about. So
that's awesome. All right, well, with the few minutes that we have left, what I'd love for each of you to touch on is some of the resources that might help folks in the audience depending on where they are in their journey, whether those be from AWS or from elsewhere. What were some of the things that you all leaned upon or found to be most helpful? And we'll just go down the line, starting with you, Julian.
Yeah, we chose deliberately to make AWS an anchor partner rather than a sort of a tag-along partner, because AWS had so much interface with other institutions we were working with, other technologies that we were considering, that if you brought AWS in sort of on the earlier side and then brought in their solutions engineers to start to ask questions, what about this part of our roadmap? What about this part of our application? What about this set of decisions we're going to need to make about new technologies we're going to bring in or new systems that we want to integrate, that you get to sort of build in their strategic wisdom into your process rather than trying to sort of fit the cloud technology into your strategy. So for us, it was really important to sort of lock in with AWS, knowing that the cloud is the foundation for so much of the other parts of what we wanted to do, and then to really just keep them engaged. You know what I mean? There's a team at AWS that is responsible for being responsive, and so just leaning on them was a really important piece. And now we're at a position where our HBCUV technology is using, I think, 30 different AWS applications, and all of those weren't apparent when we signed the contract, but we've just continued that engagement process, and it's led us to some pretty phenomenal results.
That's great. Thank you, Julian. Kevin?
Yeah, so ditto what Julian shared. The solutions architects and the nonprofit reps at AWS are great. They've been outstanding. We additionally, when you're just not sure where to start, I know one of the poll questions answers was there's too many choices. So we went through a process called Design Lab, where we basically start with a problem statement, and then AWS architects come in and you spend a couple of days literally just architecting how could we solve that problem using AWS services, and then we parlayed that a few months later into the Build Lab process, where you take that architecture that's been built in the Design Lab and you actually implement it. So really hand-holding our teams through the process of building it, because it is overwhelming when you step in. And so, yeah, that has been absolutely key. And then we additionally, we mentioned QuickSight earlier, had an on-site immersion day. So to just literally putting your team in a room and spending a day going through step by step through a workshop on how to build out that particular service. So we've done a couple immersion days at GDC. So I think at every step of the process, AWS has been there to help guide you through the complexity of going from a problem statement to a defined solution.
That's great. Good examples. Thank you, Kevin. And Borhan, and we'll wrap us up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much more to say after what you guys have said, but what I would say is this. The interesting thing about AWS is that there's so many ways, so many different paths that you can take to achieve a similar outcome, right? You could take the path of this service and this service and this service, or you could use this AWS service or whatever the combination looks like. There's just so many different ways to get to the same place. Now, getting to that same place could carry a different price tag, could carry different performance hits and so on. And from the polls, it sounds like most of you are intermediate to advanced users. So I think you want to dive into the details of what's the best path you should take for your organization. And the amount of just online, I can't speak highly enough of how much resources Amazon, AWS makes available in terms of people to help. But if you put that aside for a second and you just look at the wealth of resources that are available online, that whether it's documentation from AWS that are very extensive, or whether it's people talking about services, or whatever it is, I highly suggest that you dive deep into those, considering the level of users that you are, most of you, and try to understand what's the best path that you should take that would give you, the most optimized from a cost perspective, from a speed perspective, from delivering to what you're looking for. We find these to be very helpful, right? Being able to educate our developers and our DevOps engineers to use these online resources so they can discover that best way to move forward. I think that's one thing I would add in addition to what the great stuff that they said.
Thank you all. Just a couple more notes about resources. The research that I mentioned, the Powering Purpose in the Cloud benchmarking assessment, that's that first QR code there. If you'd like to download it and you didn't capture it earlier, that will give you a tool to use within your organizations to talk about your mindset. We have our Impact Lounge here. If you haven't already been to it, it's at the Venetian on floor 3 in the West Alcove. We've got folks there, both technical and account management resources who can answer your questions or just have a conversation. And there will also be other nonprofits there at different times. I find that in addition to all the great things you each said about AWS, the three of you are great resources for one another and for other nonprofits. I think whenever we can create that sense of community, it's really a wonderful opportunity. We all learn from each of you, and you all learn from one another. And to that end, it's not on the slide here, but we do have a nonprofit-specific conference that we host. Actually, it's next year will be March 20th in DC. It's called Imagine Nonprofit. So whereas this, of course, is on a whole nother scale and gives you visibility into lots of different industries and learning opportunities, that conference is specific to nonprofits. And then, of course, feel free to just reach out online if you aren't able to stop by our lounge. That's always available to you as well, either through this QR code or you can just visit our website. So today, we had an opportunity to dive deep a little bit into the mindsets of nonprofits when it comes to technology. We heard from our panels about their different journeys as well as challenges and opportunities that they've faced. And hopefully you each took away a little something that can help you regardless of where you are starting from. So I want to give a big thank you to our three panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us.